All right.
Do you want me to start now, or so you got it all?
So start whenever.
Oh, but if you want me to be holding on the tape, I'll just see how long I last here.
Hello, that's me. Testing, testing. Ready? Ready? Hello. Good afternoon, Silver Spring. Today, Hashim Jabbar and I, Carolyn Lowry, are here to talk about some of the impacts of the past few weeks and what this says.
Start again. The papers are about to blow away.
Bear with us as we're trying to get our papers to not fly around everywhere.
No, you did. It's live.
Okay, this is live. So again, my name is Carolyn Lowry with Racial Justice Now and the Healing Collective Global. And to start us off tonight is Hashim Jabbar with Racial Justice Now. And then from there, we'll get into a conversation and we'll have some discourse about, again, what is going on in our world right now. Hashim.
Peace and blessings, giving honor and praise to the one true and living God. We are thankful to be here. I am a senior organizer and a member of many organizations. However, I'm speaking solely of my own words tonight. I am a senior organizer with Racial Justice Now. I am the youth commissioner, national youth commissioner with the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, also known as NCOBRA, a 30-year-old organization. I am the second vice president of the Ethiopian World Federation, a national governmental or a non-governmental organization that has consultative rights at the United Nations. So we continue to do the work around human rights. Here we are today, the 17th of June, 2020, following a significant COVID-19. We're going to talk about that significant. But we are in the midst of what they call a pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, COVID-19. This is a phenomenon that many generations haven't seen. So they said it happened in the 20s, that there was some sort of pandemic. So this is again a once in a century type of drama that takes place. Most recently, there was another killing, murder of an African American, a black man, original man, an assassination caught on camera, live on television for everyone to witness over and over again. And so the world is erupting. There's been protests all around the world, literally. There's been protests in cities, we say more cities than when Dr. Martin Luther King was killed. But now we're living in the days and age of the internet and the quick transportation of communication around the world. They say fiber optics traveling at the speed of light. And so as we take in all this drama that we're going through, we have to look at the underpinnings that the land that we stand on. I'm here in Maryland. Something's going on. Something's going on there.
I reversed it.
I don't know how to use them.
Oh, sorry. Maybe somebody else. It switched views.
Here you go.
Maybe somebody
We have
else
to look
should.
at the underpinnings
I did it again. Sorry,
We
maybe
live in
somebody
a-
else can do it.
a land of injustice. And so justice being that key word that we're looking for, that we have to pull back some layers. I see a sign that says defund the police, invest in communities. There's a consciousness now. I asked somebody, a crowd of people a few days ago, if they knew that by a show of hands that the police were formerly slave catchers, and that's how it was started. So all the hands went up. I said, now how many knew that 3 months ago? And 3/4 of the hands went down. And so now we're, as a body, we're watching an awakening of the masses, you might say. An awakening of the histories and the realities of a certain people that have had to live this reality for over 400 years. Now I was telling my son, my oldest son, 2019 came by and there was the commemoration of the first slave ships that came to North America. A commemoration of the first slave ships that came to North America. So that 400 years, that number 4, that 400 years is a biblical. I brought some of our library with us here. It's a biblical number, and it's linked to a people that would be enslaved for 400 years. And so that's a conversation, that's an uncomfortable conversation, similar to the way that race and the murders that we're seeing on television, uncomfortable. How many of you saw recently that a school in Maryland, in the county, that somebody put a noose up in the school? How many saw that on the news? And so, of all the protests that are going on, all the marches, and all the White House and tear gas, right? Protests in London, and someone comes to the school following the protest and hangs a noose. Think about that. What is that? That's a commitment. That's a commitment to an idea of white supremacy. To keep a certain group of people in fear in their place. I'm 41 years young. I want to share some ancient traditions. There's such a thing they call an old soul. Sometimes an old soul, or that one's been here before, and things like that. So I want to share some ancient traditions, some ancient wisdom to help us raise our consciousness during this day and age. There's a such thing called a griot, or a storyteller in African tradition. The griot in some places is called a jelly, and they say a jelly is much more significant because it's like the heart that pumps the blood. A storyteller is somebody in the community that records all the family histories, the government histories, and then they're able to share with the people over generation and generation, and they use those stories to learn lessons and to teach lessons. So there's wisdom that the people know their own history, and they learn the lessons from their own history. So I want to tell you about a story, a woman named Fanny Redoubt. Fanny Redoubt, born around 1785. Very short, dark-skinned woman. She was 15 years old. She was born a free woman. She was 15-year-old in Maryland. In what state?
Maryland.
She was a 15-year-old in Maryland. This dark-skinned woman walking around freely, doing what she pleased. She was born free. But unfortunately, she was hit over the head, shoes taken, kidnapped, put into slavery, put in a transportation, sent up to Pennsylvania, and then later sold in West Virginia. So the history says she was a slave. But was she born a slave? For those that don't know, in the Black or African American community, there's an issue with how to self-identify. Your self-identification, because not all of us know all of our history, heritage, and culture for generations and generations. But Fanny Redoubt, she was put into slavery, and she was bold, she was brave. She was forced to marry and to have children, and those children were born in slavery or under slavery, or better said, enslaved. But she decided to run for her freedom. She was caught. Some of her children were sold. A mother torn from her children. that she was forced to have. They were sold. But guess what? She did it again. And this time she was successful. She carried in her arms one of her babies. It was named Benjamin Moore. They say Benjamin Moore later changed his name to John, or John Jameson Moore. John Jameson Moore later became to be a very significant preacher in the AME Zion denomination. The history of the AME Zion denomination shows that there were blacks attending Methodist churches in New York, but in the name of Jesus, the Methodist church was just as racist as everybody outside of the church. And so blacks had to go in by the back door. They were not allowed to preach, or if they were allowed to preach, they were only allowed to preach at certain times to certain people. They couldn't receive communion except for at certain times in certain locations. And so all the blacks or enslaved Africans or freed Africans, they decided, you know what, we're going to leave and create our own church. And that's how the AME Zion Church was founded. So this man, this woman, Fanny Redoubt, and her son, Bishop John Jameson Moore, he had a son. History says the son was from the West Indies. John Jameson Moore, he became a missionary. He traveled all over. Pennsylvania was a place, and Philadelphia was a place. He did a lot of work, but he traveled all over the country as a missionary in the name of Jesus, in the name of Christ, to build this denomination, the AME Zion denomination. And eventually he was sent all the way out from Pennsylvania to San Francisco. And he founded the second black church in the state of California, and founded the first, quote, Negro school in California. He was a freedom fighter in his own way. The AME Zion Church had other members that were abolitionists. Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth, the family of Paul Robeson, all were members and freedom fighters of this church, the AME Zion denomination. And so Bishop Moore, history says in 1852, he had a church, a brick building. This was a man that history says was a slave. He had a library in the church and had a school with 50 pupils. And so I say, in 1852, what's a black man doing with a library? How many books? I mean, was it just the Bible that he called a library? I mean, history says a library. So there's a lot of significance. He has a Wikipedia page. You can Google him, as the young people like to say. You can look him up also in the Library of Congress. He published a document there, the history of the AME Zion denomination. So Bishop John Jameson Moore had a son, Henry Harrison Moore. They say it was a preacher from the West Indies. His son, Henry Harrison Moore, had a son, Isaiah Henry Harrison Moore, who ended up becoming a child preacher. Unfortunately, Henry Harrison Moore died, and Isaiah Henry Harrison Moore became an orphan. And he also became a child preacher because somehow the family fell back into slavery. Now, what history often doesn't tell us, that black people, like Fanny, that were born free, they're walking around and they are hit over the head or kidnapped and taken and put into slavery despite their standing as free people. So the mother, Amanda Lucinda DeVault, the wife of Henry Harrison Moore, John Jameson Moore's son, she was hit in the head and had a bad wound, and she called Isaiah Henry Harrison Moore, to her bedside, and she said, "I want you to be a preacher." And I guess he said yes, and he became a child preacher. He made his first baptism at the age of 9. He dunked his friend in the water, said Jesus something, 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 and that was his first baptism. He went on to become a traveling minister, opened up many churches in Indianapolis, Indiana, Kentucky, Ohio, Arkansas, and Missouri. He was a traveling preacher, but then later he became the dean of a Bible school in Kentucky that still exists today, called the College of Scriptures. Isaiah Henry Harrison Moore, he had about 8 children. One of them was Thelma Moore. Thelma Moore lived in Dayton, Ohio. Thelma Moore, she bought a house there. that her husband built in 1953. Thelma Moore was a guidance counselor. She had 3 master's degrees, very dark woman, very short, had 3 master's degrees, and she had 2 sons, Irvin Foster and Michael Foster. Michael Foster, his ministry was in music. He played the organ, only black man in Dayton, Ohio that had an organ attached to his pickup truck. Irvin Foster became a lawyer and moved to Washington, D.C. after going to Vietnam. Irvin Foster had 2 children, Kevin Foster and Quinn Foster, and Quinn Foster later changed his name to Hashem Jabbar and is here with you today. And so it's through our lineage of our history, heritage, and culture that we get reconnected to a certain truth that leads us up to 2020, the coronavirus pandemic, and the continual police murders and defunding police schools. So as I'm growing and developing in this organizing, advocacy, and policy change, I'm continually in my library, our personal library. And it's so important that we think about a concept. We're talking about Black Lives Matter. And we talk about the concept of reparations, but think about the concept of inheritance. When a child has an inheritance from their father or their mother, they receive something when their mother or father pass on. So there's a group of people here in America, 40 or 50 million of them, that have not received their history, heritage, and culture, which is their inheritance. They have not received fair treatment from being enslaved to helping to build a country for over 400 years. And now the theme is Black Lives Matter. And so there's a lot of questions circulating in the air. Should we defund the police? Should we change policy? We need policy change. And this has been going on for 400 years. Did we say that already? 400 years? Over 400 years? So policy, what was the policy 400 years ago? It was to sell Africans, to murder Africans, to use them for profit. Now, has that policy changed today? They say, I guess we're African Americans, blacks are supposed to be free or something of that nature, or supposedly, right? However, they've received no inheritance, so they have no land. We live in Montgomery County. We want to tell another story. In Montgomery County, as we recently passed a social justice, a racial equity and social justice law. That law starts now and looks forward, but does not look backward. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about justice now. We've tipped the scales with 400 years of injustice. So here in Montgomery County, I told you my father's a veteran. He went to Vietnam. He was actually in Korea during Vietnam. But when veterans came back that looked like me, that had a GI Bill, in this county, Montgomery County, Maryland, not another state, where I am today, Montgomery County, Maryland, black GIs did not get the same treatment for housing as the white GI. So they fought for their country. Some of them died for their country. Some of them took pain and trauma for their country. And when they came home, did they get justice? Did Black Lives Matter then? But we said we had that. Well, now we have a bill, though. But now we have a bill. We have a social justice equity. But it starts in 2019. It starts in 2020. Is that just? Is that justice? And so as we have a pandemic, I looked up in my Bible, that's in my library, Bishop John Jameson Moore, he had a library. I have a library too. I've been in my library so long, God put it on my heart, it's time to come out the library. Take your head out the books, Hashem. Look around. Share what's in your library. So 400 years is this imbalance here of injustice. 400 years have we told the truth in our education system? So a lot of this now, I talked earlier about everybody raising your hands. Did you know about police being slave catchers? Oh, I know. Is it in any of your textbooks? Do you know that some of the textbooks are saying that those that were enslaved Africans were brought here as indentured slaves? That they were, just paying off some kind of a debt, and that it was very, how many of you knew that they hung us from trees? Particularly black men, that they hung us for trees. How many of you knew that? So this was a quote in necessity that Caucasian men and women decided to do. They did it as a necessity to keep certain people in their place. When that man, that police officer, that authority figure, that former slave catcher had his knee on the back, showing his force and power over another, was that the same thing as 400 years ago today? Was that the same thing as a slave catcher then as today? And so we're looking at an earth now, because I have to ask the question, where is God in all this? I have to ask the question, where is God in all of this? And so I looked up the word pandemic. And in the Bible, there's a word called pestilence. Pestilence, sicknesses appeared far and wide. Everybody got sick for some strange reason. This is during Moses in Egypt, in the time of pharaohs or presidents, right, where injustice was practiced for over 400 years to a specific group of people. But after that period, there were some things that happened. There were some actions that took place. And so as we are reading in the family library, the Bible or Quran or whatever knowledge we're digging from, we have to not look at it only from the past, we look at the present and future. And so these 400 years in slavery are those people prophesied that are here today suffer. We have to ask the question. It would be reasonable and logical to ask the question of those people that suffer for 400 years here, because it's documented. The president has documented an HR commission, a House resolution commemorating the 400 years, so it can't be denied. Are those the same people today? And if, we're talking about logic, if those same people are today, then there's something that's going to keep occurring. We're talking about the COVID-19 pandemic today that we're living under. Could it be that pestilence? We're talking about Black Lives Matter. We're talking about a police station was blown up. Oh my goodness. I don't know that that's happened in any riot. Now, I think we had some provocateurs that may have assisted some rioters in getting activity, but we see the earth just, we see it. We've been seeing it for an extended period of time. How many of you saw the rains and the floods in Michigan? Just a few weeks ago. They had to evacuate. Did you see that? That wasn't national news necessarily, huh? That news story didn't recycle too long. You're watching the earth convulse. We're watching it, we're viewing it. So here I am in Maryland, the same state that my grandmother was kidnapped. 1785, she was born. Here we are, 2020, over 100 years later. Generations later, I'm in the same state where she was kidnapped. I testified in Montgomery County Board, it's on their record, of Fannie Redoubt. So Montgomery County, what will you do to avoid further plague? Because I'm here to tell you today, it's going to get worse. Yeah. It's not going to get better. It's not going to get, why should it get better? When the balance of justice, we're talking justice. The balance of justice has not been corrected. We do education work. Bishop John Jameson Moore, the first Negro school, right? I don't know anybody in my community that self-identifies as a Negro, but that's what they called us, and so that's what we had to be. Mm-hmm. My grandmother, who's 99, she'll be 100, she said she lived to be a nigger, be a Negro, colored, African American. She said she's worn, she can list all the presidents that she, pretended to vote for. When I grew up in Washington, D.C., Northeast Washington, D.C. When I was a little boy, Ronald Reagan was the president. I'm thinking first grade. I went to Aton Elementary. Shout out to Aton Elementary, Washington, D.C., around the corner from Lincoln Heights Project. How was Washington, D.C. in the 80s? What was that like? What was Washington? It was the murder rate capital of the nation. Why was it that? Now, I'm going to do something dangerous. My mother didn't like it when I did this. I was a little boy. This is very dumb. I turn my hat backwards. That can get you murdered. That can get you murdered. A black man with his hat backwards is in my neighborhood. Come quick. I turn my hat backwards. Please don't shoot. Hands up, don't shoot. Washington, D.C. in the 80s. Ronald Reagan was the president. George Bush was the vice president. George Bush, the former CIA chief. Correct me if I'm wrong. The #1 murder capital, 66 square miles, Washington, D.C., the murder capital in the nation. Crack cocaine had its beginning at this time period. Who was the #1 drug dealer in the nation? And maybe, competing around the world. Who? He said there was a man named Rayful Edmonds. He was moving, he said major weight. He said he was moving weight, but he was not even close to the #1 drug dealer. Who was it? Ronald Reagan, the president of the United States of America. How many of us knew that? By a show of hands. Ronald Reagan. Let's go back to our files. Let's go back to the Contra affair. You remember the Contra affair? Because we're talking about the scales of injustice. It's not going to get better. It's going to get worse. God is present. We don't want to talk about God in schools. God is not allowed in school. If God is not allowed in school, is the devil allowed? Can the devil come? Is the devil welcome in school? Can you pray to the devil and not get in trouble?
I don't know, the police are welcome.
Ronald Reagan and the Contra affair, he brought drugs in, cocaine, all across the nation. But they had a specific chemical formula for the black community called crack cocaine. Now this was chemistry. Drug dealers would have to, they say, cook it up. They had to make a recipe and turn this powder cocaine into rock, to crack, which had a high addictiveness, that's not a word. It was highly addictive form of cocaine that would go to the pleasure center of the brain. A pastor told me, a pastor in Ohio, he said this was the first time that black women, African women, ever left their children. And that was the first time in history, willingly, that ever left their children for a drug that went to the pleasure center of the brain. It was made in a laboratory. So this is the scales of injustice so this was given to a specific group of people. And then what happened? Because this is the history that they're not teaching though. So when the whole world hates America, it's because we often don't know what the government has done in the name of the people. So this was done to buy guns, they say, to buy weapons that were illegal, the Iran-Contra affair. So they have a general, a soldier, Oliver North, look him up, he getting big money today, speaker fees, big money, the scales of justice, big money for speaker fees to bring drugs into the black community. Isn't that something? Now this is wickedness at the highest level. This is not local government, right? This is not on the corner around, up the street around the corner. This is at the highest level of government using taxpayers' resources. Murder, rob, kill, rape. So what did they do once they put crack cocaine? Black Lives Matter, right? Black Lives Matter. What did they do once they put crack cocaine in the black communities? So these people they that were addicted to this drug, they began to want it. They would steal to get it. They would rob to get it. Drug dealers were making lots of money now, so they would rob and kill each other over this drug. So there was heavier penalties of jail for guns and weapons, heavy penalties for crack cocaine as compared to powder cocaine, right? So if you had crack cocaine inside DC limits, you were getting 10 years of rock, whereas a child, a 16-year-old, had an ounce of cocaine and he was getting sent home and don't do it again. And is now later a lawyer, a doctor, receiving his inheritance on land that was taken away from others. And so this is an important time. I want to share a little bit of what's in the family library that I've been forced to study. This man, Bishop John Jameson Moore, I hope you look him up. See, we as original people or aboriginal people, we don't necessarily believe in death. Like Christianity say you die and go to heaven and okay. Like the original people say you continue. You know what I'm saying? You go on. Sometimes you come back and but you continue. That's the cycle of life, So you got these old souls. And so Bishop John Jameson Moore, I'm here to let the world know that he's not dead.
Yep.
He continues. And he's been bothering me. You know what I mean? And so I've been engaged in this education work, and I didn't know that he was engaged in the same education work that I was doing until I started hitting the books and reading his history. Now, we've held some rallies, haven't we? Now, 1852, there's a book, you can look it up, called about a man named Archie Lee. A man named Archie Lee in San Francisco. He was enslaved in Mississippi and somehow made it to San Francisco, and a bounty hunter was trying to take him back. But Bishop John Jameson Moore took it upon himself, apparently, to have some sort of a rally for this man's freedom. Now here we are, however many years ago later, right? At the coronavirus pandemic, now we're having rallies because Black Lives Matter. So we've been in the library uncovering his history. This giant spirit that's bothering Bishop John Jameson Moore. Now, when he was born, they gave him the name Benjamin. Benjamin is the name that was given to him when he was born, but it's written, they say, he later changed his name to respect his father to John. Now that's one clue. I'm getting all these clues that are coming to me. That's one clue. Benjamin is the name of a tribe of Israel. Correct me if I'm wrong. Benjamin, or Benjamin in Hebrew, is a tribe. And so there's a thing that they call crypto Jew, a secret Jew, someone that is Judaic in practice but hides for the fear of being murdered. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound like anybody heard of that? For the fear of being oppressed for religion. So I asked my grandmother, a cousin, I said about his grandson, Isaiah Henry Harrison Moore. I said, did Isaiah Henry Harrison Moore, did he I wanted to make sure it wasn't the SWAT team coming down to hop the curb.
No, I can see them from the rooftop.
Isaiah Henry Harrison Moore, his grandson, lived in Kentucky, Tennessee, Ohio. I asked my the oldest grandchild, 80 years old, cousin Peggy. I said, did Papa, that's what they call it, did he eat pork? This Kentucky, this Tennessee, this is so-called Negroes, right? She thought about it. She said, no, he didn't eat pork. She said, but his favorite meat, his favorite food was lamb. Lamb? Now what Negro in Kentucky does not eat pork, but prefers lamb? And so I'm getting all these clues, right? I'm continually getting these clues. And I've been guided to different books and different resources and different persons to uncover when Christopher Columbus came here, he saw a person like me and like Carol. He said, oh, there's Indians here. Do I look Indian? Christopher Columbus saw somebody look like me. He said, oh, there's Indians here. Now, it's very well documented in France, in Italy, that this land, North America, that there were already an advanced agricultural civilization here that had larger pyramids than Egypt. How many of you knew North America had multiple pyramids? Multiple pyramids. Multiple pyramids in Mexico. This book, The Pyramids in Mexico, a traveler's guide by R.A. Umar S. Bay. They call them, so this is what you have, the power of words. This is the power of words. They call them mounds. We don't call them pyramids. He said these are mounds. These were made by a group of mound builders. And so they are earth-made, not stone, mounds, hundreds of feet high, all throughout the United States. So everywhere in my family's history, I find earthen mounds. Some of them are made after creatures like alligators or lizards. All of them are astrologically attached to the stars. How did this happen? Why isn't this in our history books? Why don't we take field trips to visit these places? So our house and our home in Ohio is near an earthen mound. San Francisco, where Bishop John Jameson Moore was a bishop, earthen mounds there. Louisiana, earthen mounds. Missouri, earthen mounds. And so Christopher Columbus, he brought with him translators that could speak Spanish and Hebrew. Why do you need a translator? You come into North America for somebody that speaks Hebrew. The Mormons, how many are familiar with the Mormons in Utah? The Mormons in Utah. The Mormons in Utah have significant documentation about finding artifacts that had Hebrew written in them. Walls, paintings, caves, rocks. These are two books. This is called Return. This is We Are the Washita. This is the rebuilding a family from Louisiana that had to do what I'm doing, reconnect their history, heritage, and culture to come to find out that, no, we're not Negroes. No, we're not colored. We're not black, as you would say. We were called Moors, is what we called ourselves. Have you ever heard the saying, say, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue? Have you ever heard that poem? Well, I asked the question, well, what was happening in 1490? What happened before he sailed? 1490. The Moors, North Africans, dark-skinned, powerful group of people, were ruling Spain for almost a century. This is nowhere in our history books, nowhere in our education system at all. They ruled Europe from 711 to 1492. Tariq ibn Ziyad, conqueror, North African. According to this book by Dr. Ben, people call him Dr. Yusuf bin Jakanen, a great historian from the Caribbean, the Barbados, and Ethiopia. He documents in his book, We the Black Jews, that there were Hebrews, Jewish-speaking people here, and that also Tariq ibn Ziyad, the conqueror of that area of Spain, was from the tribe of Simeon, he said. So he knew the specific tribe. He wasn't just from Israel, the body, he was from a specific tribe in Israel. So we put together all these links. Now this book here, Stolen Legacy, once again, none of this is in our school system. This book talks about the Greeks were not the authors of Greek philosophy, but the people of North Africa, commonly called the Egyptians, were. So we're talking about Black Lives Matter, where we want the truth of Black lives to be told. That's what matters, to help balance the scales of injustice. It's not going to get better. It's going to get worse because the nation hasn't told the truth. So we're watching the earth. And so again, I'm asking the question. I'm just introducing the subject. There's so much. There's so much. It's an introduction to the subject. So we're talking about the Moors. The Moors in Spain. Now this book, Return of the Ancient Ones of Washita. The Washita Empire. They call it the Mundia. And this book talks about all of the ancient, the different mounds and pyramids and the various histories. This woman, Empress Bertiaci, she won a court case to reconnect herself to land. We talked about inheritance, right? To reconnect herself to land that was owed to her family, that was found to be nobles, royalty. And she said in her documentation in winning the court case that in France, in Italy, in these places that the Moors ruled, in these vaults, we have plenty of documentation of this land of North America and how we ruled. Now, how many of us know the first nation to recognize the United States as a nation? Now, that's how you become a nation. So when you first get started, another nation has to recognize you specifically for the reason of trade and commerce. Not just because, hey, you exist, that's nice, okay, that's great. No, you got something to trade, we can do business, let them into our ports. If they come in with this flag, don't shoot, because they're allowed into our ports to come and do trade. The first nation to do that was Morocco. That's the first nation to recognize. Why Morocco? Because Morocco controlled the 7 seas. Morocco had the #1 navy in the world. And so George Washington wrote to the Sultan of Morocco, had what our brother say, rap artist, he said, put some respect on his name. He had to put some respect on the name of the Sultan of Morocco, a brother. And so this is history and an example and just an introduction of where we have to go to balance the scales of injustice. And so as it continues to rain, just a few weeks ago, just a few months ago, how many of us remember a flood at the White House? He said that the flood in Washington, D.C. rose so high at the White House that the tunnels were flooded. This is the Washington Post. You can go back and look it up. And this is God showing you. You can't run. I know you got nuclear weapons, you got bombs, you got guns, you think you have authority and power, but at the end of the day, there's a greater power. There's a greater justice. And if you don't balance the scales, then you got something coming for you. Look at where we are. A pandemic, is it like a pestilence? Are these people 400 years that have served, are they the ones that the scriptures is talking about? These are questions that are valid questions that affect the reality that we're living in today. This land, I'm here to tell you, I've had family that have had dreams to see floods here. I'm on the record. I'm on the record. That's the kind of family I come from. My grandmother, Thelma Moore, he say, Isaiah Moore, let me back up. He said he would be walking down the street with one of his children. He say, step to the side. Hey, let that spirit go. He said he everywhere he went, he said he wore a top hat and tails. He was a Mason, a 33rd degree Mason, master Mason. My grandmother would see spirits of her husband in instances of need of protection. So this is the bloodline. This is the spirit, the energy, the unseen forces. So we're looking, Lord, please help us, Father. But the energy that's working through, within man, within woman, that's the spirit and the energy that we see the earth convulsing. You see it convulsing and shaking. And so that scale, we got to go back to it, of injustice. This is the furthest the reparations argument or dialogue has gone. H.R. 40, National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, has, for over 20 plus years, pushed legislation to demand reparations. For a while, he wouldn't even study it, wouldn't even have the conversation. Black Lives Matter. Where is the inheritance? Black Lives Matter are people that have no land, that are forced to be employees. Is that a synonym for slave? Is that a synonym for indentured servant? We have to ask these questions. Black Lives Matter. We have to, now we're getting into a place now, they say we have, I'm so glad we have white allies. White people are in the fights, and now everything is going to be great. How long we've been working that out? 400 years? Have we been asking for white allies for 400 years? We've been under certain policies. We're looking for policy changes today. How's that been going for 400 years? We have to ask some significant questions. Where is God in all of this? Valid questions, valid concerns. Because the protesters, they're looking for a change. They want to know that their work paid off. We will go in the street, and then what? We're going to tell them what we need, and then what? Do we expect a change that will be justice? What does justice look like? In reality, is justice somebody that doesn't kill us when they see us immediately? Is that just? Is that fair? Is that what we're looking for? So we have to go to the scripture. We just introducing. We can't even dig into this. We're just introducing this subject because there's a lot of questions that we have to ask. We're talking about education. This book here, The Maroon Within Us, Dr. Baba Asa G. Hilliard, he talks about ancient education systems in Egypt. Now, we just said the Greeks got their information from Egypt, right? He talks about the ancient education being set up. The purpose of it was to become one with God. Go to a third grade class at any school. Ask the children, why do you go to school? So I can get a good job. That's the resounding response. That's America's training. That's why we learn. That's why we educate so that we can be good employees. And we have to ask the question, is it a synonym for servant? Is it a synonym for slave? Is it? If you don't have any land, if you don't have any inheritance, and then your sole dependence is on those that have stolen, robbed you of your language, your history, your heritage, and your culture, is that just? Now he says, here again, to be coming to oneness with God. That was the methodology. And the school, the way that they had their school set up, was not like the mass schools of today. We're going to talk about that Horace Mann and the schools that Horace Mann set up today that we are possibly leaving out of Horace Mann's school. But the schools they set up, teachers were teaching from their library. Teachers were teaching from the books, from the knowledge, from the wisdom that they had in their personal library. So we must resort to the same, because in this nation, we have 5 main publishers of all the school books across the nation. 5 main publishers, all the school books. So we're not getting the whole truth. We're not getting the half truth. We're getting a truth that benefits those in power. Going through the family library, this book, they came before Columbus, Ivan Van Sertima. I didn't read this book. I'm a graduate of college. I'm a graduate of the university. I have a bachelor's degree. How come I didn't know that we were here before Columbus? This man did the research for years in a commitment to find out that there was a generation of what they call the Olmecs. A generation that is the Olmecs, that they say on this continent of North America and South America, the Olmec civilization is the parent generation to all the civilizations. According to this research. Now, how many of these books are you going to find in the public education system? Ivan Van Sertima. The Moors of Spain. 1492, Columbus sailed in ocean blue. But from 711 to 1490, the Moors ruled Spain. When the Moors, these dark-skinned Africans, went into Spain, they found a very savage people. The kings and queens of Europe were living in their barns at this time, 711. The kings and queens in Europe lived in the same places as their chickens and their cows. The Moors taught Europeans to bathe, that bathing was healthy. This was the Moors doing. Now, we're at a point in time, we're in a pandemic, they say, wash your hands. Everywhere you go, wash your hands. But the Moors set up bathing houses to help Europeans become cleanly, to avoid the Black Plague that came to Europe. Back to that pestilence again, right? So these are the uncomfortable truths, but it's the truth. Back to that balancing the scales of justice. Nobody wants to talk about it because we're talking about education as well. So are we teaching the children to be slaves? Are we teaching the children to be white lives matter in their minds? With their white ideologies that everything is white is right. Everything that's black, jump back, seems to lack. That's the American education system. So in this book, Moors of Spain, this is printed, in the 1800s. This is an old book in the family library. This is an old book. 1880, first published 1886. Wow. Stanley Lee Poole. He has a series of these books. And he documents very well that Moors built over 17 universities when there was one in Europe. The Moors taught agriculture, science, history, mathematics, and guess what? The golden age of Judaism, the golden age, documented many books, was in Moorish Spain. Because the Moors were just people. They were a loving people, a fair people in their government. Many Jews look like me, and they helped to govern this nation. It was the Islamic nation, but they helped to govern it, and they had their own laws, their own kibbutz, and in Cordoba and various other places. And so there's a great history of knowledge and science and ancient wisdom. Even bathing houses. Maybe we need some bathing houses today. right? Maybe people need to learn to be a little more cleanly. Maybe we don't need to be as afraid, but we should be more inclined to the steam room and the sauna. Not running with masks over our faces, but running to the steam room and sauna. They said the coronavirus doesn't take certain kind of heat, right? So we're looking at our ancient traditions. Golden trade of the Moors. Again, I said the first nation to recognize the United States was Morocco. And Morocco allowed George Washington to send ships into his port, and therefore was open for business. So commerce, trade, and commerce, people use the term capitalism. There's an ancient trade of trade and commerce. Capitalism is a type of trade and commerce. And so the Moors have been known throughout history for centuries to engage in trade and commerce. Now, when the people were enslaved, robbed, their names were taken, their history was taken, their language was taken, their culture was taken, and they were forced into manual labor. So their skills as merchants were taken. Their skills as agricultural scientists, builders, constructions, taken. Who built the White House? Do we think that slaves with no knowledge, dummies, built the White House? Who built the Capitol? Where is that in our education system? Now, they say Montgomery is very progressive. That's what I hear. We have to define progressive. We have to define it. It's very progressive. What's the truth that we are telling or not telling? And so we just introducing some of these subjects. And so I'm gonna end with reading the book, some of the introduction of the book, because we're gonna talk about what justice looks like. And all this is, again, from the family library. Bishop Moore, to start the AME Zion Church, took organizing. It was organizing after, Black Lives Matter, where everybody is protesting, rallying, and doing good work. And so the fundamentals of building an institution is organizing the people and creating a structure for the people so that the people can govern their lives. Now, Bishop Moore documented what they called connections and conferences, conventions that they had annually, semi-annually, biannually, Baltimore, Philadelphia, North Carolina, Connecticut, right? Year in and year out. So he documented who was present, how much money was raised, what was the topic of conversation, who was the president, who was the vice president, who were the new people there, right? So we read, because after he was made bishop, he was commissioned by the board of bishops to go and document the history, which he placed in the late 1880s in the Library of Congress. So documentation says he was a slave. That's what they call him. He was a slave. And I argue, you can look at his Wikipedia page, that he was enslaved. That he was enslaved, that he was in bondage. He was held against his will. Not a slave. See, a slave creates the mindset of dependency, this mindset of stupidity, the mindset of being incapable, of less than, of low value. But enslaved, you're a POW. You ever seen a POW flag? Stand up straight. It's a POW. But when you are enslaved, you're considered a nigger, right? Less than, low value. So this enslaved individual was brilliant enough to leave documentation that lasts hundreds of years. It's 2020 and I'm reading this documentation. Now what does he say? Because we're talking about what justice looks like. And he breaks down, and this is the preface. This is just the beginning. He'll say, The first great religious truth that awoke our reflections and incited us to action on the subject of our own separate organization was that Christianity provided a platform of brotherly love sufficiently broad to admit all Christ followers to a full religious fellowship and religious association. A platform so broad as to execute the necessity of caste or race prescriptions to prevent their Christian associations as a religious brotherhood being a religious social detriment. Having settled upon this great truth, we felt no hesitancy in seeking to establish ourselves in an organization with a religious platform, where no race, prescriptions, or frictions could restrict our religious privileges, enjoyments, and interrupt our brotherly association as followers of Christ. Secondly, great truth taught by Christianity, another grand incentive to our determined purpose in establishing our separate organization was that the gospel of Christ intended and provided that men converted to Christianity and called into the work of the gospel ministry, that such men had a right to and should engage in the work of evangelizing mankind, irrespective of their race or caste, fully conscious of this great truth. We felt it our privilege and our duty to put ourselves in a position to enjoy this Christian privilege. A third essential or important truth that prompted us in our conception and purpose of a separate and independent organization was that the Christian church was a religious compact that could be organized in separate local societies under such forms of local government as circumstances might dictate, in that each member of such local organization had an equal franchise in the formation of their ecclesiastical constitutions or local church government. So what does that say? What is the point? Bishop John Jameson Moore and the founders of the AME Zion Church understood if they're not going to treat us right, we're going to lead and set up something for ourselves. It was very clear that they were not going to be treated right. It was not an attempt to integrate into theirs. That didn't work. They received racist practices. So they decided to set up something of their own. Dear black people, you have options. Repatriation is an option. There are many people that want you to come home to Africa. That's not for everybody, I understand that, but it is for some. There are currently 12 nations, African nations, that have dual citizenship. That is an option. If you are not treated well in this economy, there are many other economies out there. After slavery ended, there were over 60 what they call black towns set up throughout America. These were African Americans or blacks that were founding their own towns. They wanted to live by themselves. The issue with blacks has never been we necessarily want to live with white people or we want to integrate. We don't necessarily want to just move into your neighborhood. But what happens when we have our own neighborhood? Do we get less funding? Do we get bad roads? Do we get unfunded schools? Do we get poisoned water? Do we get somebody coming to bomb the city like they did in Philadelphia? Dropped a bomb on our brothers and sisters in Philadelphia from the MOVE organization? Like Tulsa, Oklahoma, where they dropped the first bomb ever on North American soil on a black community? So he said, we can't have our own towns, they'll kill us. No, we just have to learn our lessons. We just have to study our history. Our history is our inheritance. So second time around, we'll be ready. We'll be ready. So we have options. So while we talk about policy change, while we talk about defunding the police, we've always been running from the police, and maybe we need to keep running into another city or town of our own. We have options. The children of Israel were not told to integrate.
They were not told to make Pharaoh treat you better. Make Pharaoh change his policy. That's not what the word said. That was not the story that was told. So do you want to follow that story, or you want to make your own? Because we had some serious questions, and we're just introducing the subject today. What's that, 4, 5, 6? Just a few books from the library. Now you can go to Moorzion, MOORZION.com to get more information. Learn more about the history of our heritage and our culture, MOORZION. Racial Justice Now is doing great education work. Sister Carolyn is leading the work here in education for Racial Justice Now, the DMV chapter. That's at rjndmv.org. You can learn more about that work. But we are just introducing a subject. We're just breaking the ice. And so God put it on my heart, and I think my heart is relieved, at least for the time being. I might be back tomorrow. Because we have to continue to tell this truth. For 400 years, that's 20 generations. Think about that. There's a song you go, over and over and over and over again. You can have a piece of my love. You know, remember that? Over and over again. Now this has been going on for 420 generations, but now we think that we're going to change a policy and it's going to be okay. We're going to defund the police and they're going to go for that. We're going to vote for Bernie Sanders and everything will be okay. We have to ask some serious questions today. Where is God in all? We are in the midst of a pandemic. 3 years from now, a lot of people that are living will not be alive. A lot of 30-year-olds that are living 3 years from now will not be alive. A lot of 20-year-olds that are living now will not be alive. 3 years from now. That's a reality. We are in the midst of a pandemic. Is that like a pestilence? We're asking the question. The balance of justice. You know, this president is very interesting. Very interesting. And I'm in with the president. And I don't like to talk about the president. That's above my pay grade. That's for my teacher. But I hear a lot of people saying he's so stupid and he's dumb and he's ignorant and what an idiot, what a fool. Now, from the perspective of oppressed people, now, all of those people that call Donald Trump a fool and an idiot in those derogatory terms, he holds the highest office in the land. And if he is an idiot, what are you? Now that don't feel good when I say it. You don't. I've been wanting to say it for a long time, but a lot of people look real dumb. Quite honestly, he's stupid. But he can sign a piece of paper and you be under the jail. You be gone. You be where nobody can find you under the Patriot Act. Well, he's a fool. He's an idiot. He is at the highest office in the land. He has his daughters working for him with $1 million budget. How many of you have put your daughters in $1 million budget position? He has his son-in-law working for him, right? He's keeping it in the family. So for all of those that swear he's so dumb and he's a fool, question yourself. You weren't smart enough to get somebody in there besides him, but he's the fool? You weren't smart enough to have another candidate ready, or you run against him because you're so much smarter? Be careful what you calling this president, because he holds the highest. I'm American. Yeah. I'm a certain kind of American. You say African American or Moorish American. I'm a certain kind of an American. If we know the history of the red, white, blue flag, where that came from, we say we made that flag. If we're going to tell the whole truth, that's another story for another time. But November is coming. November's around the corner. It's really about to get interesting. We are in a national state of an emergency. Do you know that gives your president wide-ranging powers? We're on the internet right now. You know he can turn that off if he feels good like it. Do you know that? National state of emergency. He can knock on your door and you can never be heard of again. Don't think it can't happen. The Justice Department, they asked to indefinitely detain individuals. That's what you're dealing with. We're talking about the balance of justice. And so, praise God for this little moment in time. I'm thankful to be here. Black lives do matter. Yes, all lives matter, but black lives have been oppressed for so long that they have to be butchered, to get back to where they can live. Not in a state of fear, not in a state of survival, barely existing, but a state where they can excel and give to their communities, give to their nation, and give to their families, and pass on a history, a heritage, a culture, and an inheritance to their children. Reparations is due. That's the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, HR 40. Reparations are due. The call for reparations has been out. We're going to see what the president, now he likes to make a deal. He's a deal maker. He's a deal maker. Now, I'm going to tell you, and I guess we can try and leave it here, but I had the book, Return of the Ancient Ones. Carol, there's land in Louisiana that she won. Hundreds of acres. Hundreds of acres. Empress, Verdiatri, Tiara, Washita, Turner, OdoKhan-El Bay. People like to laugh like that's funny and that's so strange and unusual. But hell, being enslaved for 400 years is strange and unusual. She's won a court case. Now, this is no run-of-the-mill lady. She was the mayor of a city. She worked for a presidential, not campaign, but administration, either Nixon or Ronald Reagan, one of them. This is a significant, look her up. They won land. Now, what was it that God promised the children of Israel? Now, nobody wants to talk about this conversation. 2019, 400 years, it's documented. What was it that God gave the children of Israel? He gave them a promised land. Is that it? We got some questions to answer. I'm putting some things on the table. A lot of people won't like what I say, but God is the greatest. End of the day, every day. So, Carol, I'm going to let you close us out. I appreciate you. God bless you. I don't know how long we talked, but I think we helped raise the consciousness of our people. Thank you.
And there you have it, Hashem Jabbar. He called today and said, hey, can you meet me out here in the plaza in Silver Spring? I said, sure, what are we doing? I said, come on, we'll see. I think these are conversations we're going to continue having. I'm looking forward to pulling out some of this information that Hashem has talked about. I want to leave reminding us that the reason we were brought to this country, the reason we were kidnapped, is because of our understanding of nature, of our understanding of agriculture and astrology and astronomy and I just lost my words. Understanding of how our solar system affects our land and how we can grow. And that is the reason why we've been commodities for an entire time we've been in this country. I want you to remember, too, that a lot of us say that you can find God in nature. And so just sit with that. Think about what that means. Your connection to nature, your connection to the land is the thing that got you here, and is the thing that is the most important thing to remember. And it's our inheritance, and it's been taken away. Until next time, thank you.